Ancient Rome had athletes doing sponsor deals. Greece gave an Olympic gold medal to a dead body. And the Aztecs bet entire kingdoms on a single ball game. These are not jokes. These are 33 real, verified, historically documented facts about sports in the ancient world. And every single one of them sounds like someone made it up after drinking way too much wine. This is ancient sports at their absolute dumbest, weirdest, and most unhinged. 1. You know how today's athletes slap their names on energy drinks and underwear? Turns out, Roman gladiators got there first. Popular gladiators were ancient Rome's version of celebrity influencers, and they had actual sponsorship deals with local businesses. Their names and images showed up in graffiti advertisements on the walls of cities like Pompeii, promoting everything from olive oil to wine to pottery shops. Some gladiators even had their likenesses painted on shop signs to draw in customers. So picture this, a man whose literal day job was stabbing other men to death in front of 50,000 screaming fans, and then his face ends up on the ancient equivalent of a billboard selling cooking oil. The producers of the movie Gladiator actually considered including a product endorsement scene in the script, but cut it because they thought audiences would never believe it was real. If that is not proof that history is always stranger than fiction, nothing is. 2. In 564 BC, a Greek fighter named Aristocratic of Phrygia entered the Olympic finals of the pancration, which was basically ancient mixed martial arts with almost no rules. His opponent locked him in a chokehold so tight that Aristocratic actually died right there on the arena floor. But here is where it gets wild. In his final moments, Aristocratic managed to twist and dislocate his opponent's ankle so badly that the guy screamed, tapped out, and surrendered. The judges looked at the situation, shrugged, and declared the dead man the winner. Aristocratic was crowned Olympic champion posthumously, and his corpse was literally propped up to receive the victory wreath. They even erected a statue of him in his hometown marketplace, which means this man had a better post-death career than most people have while alive. That is not commitment. That is a man who refused to lose on a molecular level. 3. Ancient Athens had some truly spectacular legal opinions about responsibility. If a discus thrower accidentally killed a spectator during competition, the thrower himself was often acquitted because the death happened in an athletic context. But the discus? The actual bronze disc that did the killing? That got put on trial. The Athenians practiced something called the trial of inanimate objects, where weapons, statues, or in this case sporting equipment, were formally prosecuted for causing death. The guilty object would then be ceremonially cast beyond the city borders as punishment, which is essentially deportation for a piece of metal. So a chunk of lifeless bronze got dragged into court, found guilty of murder, and sentenced to exile, while the guy who actually launched it at lethal velocity walked free. Somewhere in ancient Athens, a lawyer once stood in front of a jury and argued his case against a disc, and nobody in the room thought that was weird. 4. The ancient Egyptians loved their water sports, but they took it to a level that would make modern extreme athletes quietly retire. Egyptian fishermen and boatmen held jousting tournaments on the Nile River, standing on small papyrus boats and trying to knock each other into the water with long poles. Sounds fun, right? Except the Nile was absolutely crawling with hippos and crocodiles. Falling in did not just mean you lost the match. It meant you might become lunch for a 2,000-pound territorial hippo or a Nile crocodile with a bite force strong enough to crush bone. And these events had spectators lining the riverbanks, cheering, placing bets, having a great time while their friends fought for survival 20 feet away. The ancient Egyptian word for second place might as well have been digested. That is what peak entertainment looked like before Netflix. 5. In 67 AD, Roman Emperor Nero decided he wanted to compete in the Olympic Games. And by compete, I mean he forced the Greeks to postpone the entire Olympics by 2 years just to fit his schedule, and then made them add events that did not even exist before. He signed up for the 10-horse chariot race, which was already insane, and then proceeded to fall out of his chariot during the event. He could not even finish the race. But here is the punchline. The judges declared Nero the winner anyway. Their official reasoning was essentially, he would have won if he had not fallen. which is the most powerful use of hypothetical grammar in human history. After Nero died, the embarrassed Olympic officials quietly erased his victory from the records and pretended the entire 67 AD Games never happened. Every student who ever asked a teacher for extra credit has nothing on this man. 6. The Mesoamerican ball game known as Pok-a-Tok was not your average recreational activity. Players had to keep a solid rubber ball, weighing around 8 to 9 pounds, in play using only their hips, elbows, and knees. No hands, no feet. The ball was heavy enough to cause serious bruises, broken bones, and even internal bleeding on impact. But the real kicker, literally and figuratively, was what happened after the game. In many Mesoamerican cultures, the losing captain, and sometimes even the winning captain, was ritually sacrificed to the gods. Scholars still debate which side got sacrificed, and honestly, neither option sounds like a great employee benefits package. Imagine training your entire life for a sport where the best-case scenario is you win, and might still get your heart ripped out on a stone altar in front of a cheering crowd. The recruitment pitch for this sport must have been absolutely wild. 7. In ancient Greece and Rome, there was a booming market for athlete body fluids. And yes, that sentence is historically accurate. After training or competing, Greek athletes and Roman gladiators would have the mixture of sweat, oil, and dead skin scraped off their bodies using a curved metal tool called a strigil. This disgusting sludge was then collected, bottled up in small vials, and sold at premium prices. Wealthy Roman women bought it as a luxury skincare product and even as an aphrodisiac. The sweat of famous gladiators was especially prized and could fetch ridiculous sums of money. So the next time someone tries to sell you a $40 jar of celebrity-endorsed face cream, just remember, 2,000 years ago, rich women were rubbing actual gladiator sweat on their faces and calling it beauty care. If you told a Roman socialite that her skincare routine was disgusting, she would have looked at you like you were the crazy one. We genuinely have not changed as much as we think. 8. Among the Inuit and various indigenous peoples of North America, there existed an ancient sport that sounds like it was invented at 3 in the morning by someone who lost a bet. Two competitors would sit facing each other and connect their ears with a loop of sinew or leather cord. Then they would lean back and pull in opposite directions. The goal was to endure the searing pain longer than your opponent. The match ended when one person surrendered from the agony, or, in extreme cases, when someone's ear actually tore. This was not some fringe dare among bored teenagers. This was a legitimate, respected competitive sport with spectators and traditions behind it. It was a test of raw pain tolerance and mental toughness, and it makes every tough modern sport look like a heated argument over a board game. Somewhere, Mike Tyson's ear-biting incident suddenly feels historically on brand. 9. The Romans were never ones to think small, and that definitely applied to their entertainment budget. On special occasions, engineers would flood the floor of the Colosseum with water to stage full-scale naval battles called naumachii. We are talking real warships, real weapons, and thousands of condemned prisoners and war captives forced to fight to the death on the water, while 50,000 spectators watched from the stands. The inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 AD under Emperor Titus included exactly this kind of spectacle. The logistics alone were staggering: diverting water, floating actual ships inside an amphitheater, and then draining it all to go back to regular gladiator fights the next day like it was nothing. Emperor Nero once even threw live seals and hippos into his version of the flooded arena, and historians still have no idea what happened to those animals when they drained the water afterward. It was engineering brilliance in the service of absolute unhinged madness. 10. Starting in 396 BC, trumpet playing became an official Olympic event, and it was judged exactly how you would hope. It was called the contest of the salpinktai, and it was evaluated not on melody, not on technique, and definitely not on anything resembling musical beauty. The sole criteria were volume and duration. Whoever could blast the loudest, longest, most earth-shaking note from a bronze trumpet won the olive wreath. The legendary champion Herodoros of Megara dominated this event for 10 consecutive Olympiads, reportedly because his trumpet blast was so powerful it could be heard from enormous distances. Ancient sources also claim he could play two trumpets at once, which either makes him incredibly talented or incredibly annoying. So ancient Greece literally gave out Olympic medals for being the loudest person in the room. Every kid who ever got yelled at for being too noisy was apparently just training for the wrong century. 11. While most ancient sports involved blood, broken bones, or at a minimum a lot of screaming, Japan went in a completely different direction with Kemari. This ball game, popular among aristocrats during the Heian period, had one simple and beautifully wholesome rule: keep the ball in the air. That is it. There was no scoring, no winning, no losing. Players stood in a circle wearing elaborate, heavy silk robes that made quick movement nearly impossible, and they gently kicked a deerskin ball to each other while trying to look as graceful and composed as humanly possible. The entire point was cooperation, elegance, and maintaining harmony. If you dropped the ball, nobody scored a point. Everybody just felt slightly disappointed in you, which honestly might be a more effective punishment than anything the Greeks came up with. In a world where every other ancient sport seemed designed to maximize bodily harm, Kemari was just a group of well-dressed aristocrats politely kicking a ball around and somehow making it look dignified. 12. As if regular gladiatorial combat was not terrifying enough, the Romans invented the andabatai, a class of gladiators who fought completely blind. They wore heavy helmets with no eye holes whatsoever, meaning they could not see a single thing. They would stumble around the arena, swinging their weapons wildly in random directions while the crowd roared with laughter. The audience found it absolutely hilarious, which tells you everything you need to know about Roman entertainment standards. These fighters were often condemned criminals or prisoners of war, so they had zero choice in the matter. Imagine being thrown into a packed stadium with a sword you can barely hold, a helmet you cannot see through, and another equally blind, equally terrified person somewhere nearby, also swinging a blade at nothing. The Romans really looked at fair, dignified combat and thought, what if we made it stupid? And then they sold tickets to it, because of course they did. 13. Ancient records claim that a Greek athlete named Phalos of Croton once jumped 55 feet in the long jump at the Pythian Games. That is nearly 17 meters, which is almost double the current modern world record. The jump was supposedly so long that he completely overshot the entire sandpit and landed on hard ground beyond it. Now, obviously, this is physically impossible for an unaided human being. Historians have been arguing about this for centuries. Some think the measurement was wrong. Others believe it might have been a triple jump rather than a single leap. A few have jokingly suggested he may have just jumped off an elevated surface, making it less of a long jump and more of a trust fall with ambition. Whatever actually happened, the ancient Greeks were so impressed that Phalos became a household name. His impossible jump became proverbial, basically the ancient equivalent of an urban legend that everyone swore was absolutely, definitely, 100% true. 14. The ancient Hawaiians invented a sport called heiaholua, or lava sledding, and it was exactly as insane as it sounds. Athletes would lie face down on narrow wooden sleds, barely wider than their bodies, and launch themselves headfirst down the steep, jagged, rocky slopes of volcanic mountains. These were not smooth, groomed ski slopes. These were rough lava rock courses that could shred skin on contact, and riders reached speeds of up to 50 miles per hour. The sport was deeply tied to the worship of Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, and courses were sometimes built on the sides of active volcanic terrain. One wrong move, and you were basically a human cheese grater going down a mountain at highway speed. So to summarize, ancient Hawaiians strapped themselves to a plank of wood and threw themselves down a volcano to honor a fire goddess. Every modern extreme sports influencer just got outclassed by about 2,000 years. 15. Melankomas of Caria was crowned Olympic boxing champion around 49 AD, and he achieved it in the most unlikely way imaginable. He never threw a single punch, not one. His entire strategy was pure defense. He would dodge, weave, and block every attack thrown at him, and he could keep this up for hours without breaking a sweat while his opponents slowly lost their minds. Ancient sources describe him as having perfected the art of not fighting, which is maybe the most brilliantly lazy athletic achievement in history. His opponents would eventually exhaust themselves trying to land a hit on a man who moved like smoke, and they would surrender out of sheer frustration and fatigue. Imagine training your entire life to be the ultimate warrior, and then losing to a guy whose entire game plan was, "I am simply not going to participate." Modern boxers train their whole lives to throw the perfect punch. Melankomas trained his whole life to make sure he never had to. 16. Gaius Apuleius. Diocles was a Roman charioteer who raced for 24 years, starting at age 18, and retired as arguably the richest athlete who ever walked the earth. Over his career, he won 1,162 races and accumulated total prize earnings of 35,063,120 sesterces. To put that in perspective, that was enough money to feed the entire city of Rome for a full year, or pay the salaries of nearly 30,000 Roman soldiers. Modern estimates place his career earnings at the equivalent of roughly $15 billion in today's money, which would make him richer than any modern athlete by a margin so large it is almost embarrassing. And he did all of this in a sport where the average life expectancy was terrifyingly short. Most charioteers died young, violently, and in front of a cheering crowd. Diocles somehow survived 24 years of it, got astronomically rich, and retired to live out his days in comfort. That man did not just beat the odds. He lapped them, collected prize money, and retired to a villa. 17. When you hear tug of war, you probably picture a casual game at a company picnic where Gary from accounting falls in the mud. The ancient Greeks saw it very differently. They called it helkustinda, and they treated it as a serious martial art and an essential part of elite military training. Spartan soldiers and other Greek warriors used tug of war to build raw pulling strength, grip endurance, and the kind of full-body power needed for close-quarters combat on the battlefield. This was not a fun weekend activity. It was a structured, competitive discipline practiced by some of the most feared fighters in the ancient world. The rope was effectively a training weapon, and losing meant you were not ready for war. So the next time you see a tug of war at a school field day and think it is harmless fun, remember that ancient Sparta used the exact same exercise to forge soldiers capable of destroying entire armies. Gary from accounting would not have lasted 5 seconds. 18. The Aztec nobility was absolutely obsessed with the Mesoamerican ball game, and their gambling on it reached levels that can only be described as clinically insane. Aztec kings and nobles would wager entire cities, provinces, gold, slaves, and their own personal freedom on the outcome of a single match. There are recorded accounts of rulers literally betting their own kingdoms and losing everything in one afternoon. Some nobles gambled so recklessly and so often that they ended up destitute, going from powerful lords to owning absolutely nothing because a rubber ball bounced the wrong way. The addiction was so widespread that it became a genuine political problem that advisors could not solve. Empires were not just built through war and diplomacy in Mesoamerica. Sometimes they changed hands because a king could not resist placing one more bet on a ball game. Somewhere, every modern sports gambler just felt a deep, unexplainable sense of kinship across the centuries. 19. If you think modern sports referees have it tough, ancient Greek officials took a radically different and honestly much more satisfying approach to maintaining order. Judges at the Olympic Games and other athletic competitions, known as hellanodikai, carried heavy wooden rods or leather whips, and they used them freely and enthusiastically. If an athlete committed a foul, made a false start, or broke any rule, the judge would simply walk over and beat them on the spot. Right there, mid-competition, in front of everyone. No yellow card, no penalty box, just immediate physical punishment. There are ancient vase paintings that literally show referees mid-swing whacking athletes during events, and the athletes just had to take it. It was an incredibly effective system. The threat of getting publicly thrashed by an official with a stick probably kept rule-breaking to an absolute minimum. Honestly, if the NBA introduced referee whips tomorrow, flopping would disappear overnight. 20. The ancient Greeks played a brutal team sport called episkairos that was essentially an early, completely unhinged ancestor of modern rugby. Two teams faced off on a field with a center line and tried to force a ball past the opposing team's back boundary. The ball itself was made from an inflated pig bladder wrapped in leather, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds and probably worse than it smells. There were very few rules, and the level of physical violence was extreme. Players tackled, shoved, tripped, and threw each other around with zero protective equipment and zero apologies. The Romans later adopted a version of it called harpastum, which was, somehow, even more violent, because the Romans never encountered a sport they could not make bloodier. So the next time someone tells you rugby is a brutal sport, just know that the ancient Greeks were playing a version of it with a pig bladder ball 2,000 years ago, and they thought your version was adorable. 21. In ancient Rome, chariot racing was not just a sport. It was a full-blown cultural obsession that made modern football rivalries look like a polite disagreement at brunch. Fans were divided into factions identified by color, mainly the blues, greens, reds, and whites, and their loyalty was absolutely fanatical. These factions functioned like a mix of sports fan clubs, political parties, and organized street gangs. The rivalry between the blues and the greens became so intense that in 532 AD, it literally sparked the Nika riots in Constantinople. Both factions united against Emperor Justinian I, burned down half the city, including the original Hagia Sophia, and nearly overthrew the entire Byzantine government. Tens of thousands of people died before the army crushed the uprising. All of it, because of chariot racing teams. Imagine if fans of two soccer clubs accidentally started a civil war and nearly toppled an emperor. That is not a hypothetical. That is a Tuesday in Constantinople. 22. On the island of Crete, the ancient Minoans practiced what might be the most terrifyingly impressive athletic feat in all of history: bull leaping. Based on vivid frescoes found at the Palace of Knossos dating back to around 1400 BC, athletes would sprint directly at a charging bull, grab its horns at the exact moment of impact, and use the bull's own upward thrust to launch themselves into a backflip over the animal's entire body, landing behind it. If the timing was off by even a fraction of a second, the athlete would be gored, trampled, or both. Scholars still debate whether this was a sport, a religious ritual, or both. But the physical skill required was absolutely staggering. The margin for error was essentially zero, and the consequence for failure was a one-ton animal stepping on your everything. These people looked at a raging bull running full speed at them and thought, "I bet I can do a flip over that." Ancient Crete did not have a word for risk assessment, and it shows. 23. Ancient Greek boxing had no rounds, no time limits, and no weight classes. But it did have one rule for when a fight dragged on too long, and it was gloriously, beautifully brutal. If a match continued until near sunset with no clear winner, the judges could declare a climax. In this tiebreaker, the two fighters took turns standing completely still while the other delivered one full power, undefended punch directly to the face or body. No blocking, no dodging, no flinching. Just standing there and absorbing it. They alternated hits until one man collapsed. It was essentially a formalized, take turns punching each other in the face protocol, and the ancient Greeks considered it a perfectly reasonable, completely normal way to settle a sporting dispute. It is basically rock, paper, scissors, except the rock is a fist and there are no other options. If modern boxing adopted this rule, pay-per-view ratings would probably triple overnight. 24. The ancient Chinese ball game Cuju, which literally translates to kick the ball, is recognized as one of the earliest forms of football in human history. But it was not invented for fun. During the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC, Cuju was developed as a rigorous military training exercise designed to keep soldiers in peak physical condition and improve their coordination, agility, and endurance. Troops would kick a leather ball filled with feathers or hair through a small opening in a net. And the training was intense, demanding, and absolutely mandatory. It eventually evolved into a popular recreational sport played across all levels of Chinese society, from soldiers to emperors, because even ancient generals realized that forcing men to kick a ball around was cheaper than building an obstacle course. So the next time someone says soccer is just a game, you can tell them it literally started as war training for one of the most powerful empires in ancient history. 25. At the ancient Olympic Games, cheating was not just frowned upon. It was punished with the kind of maximum public humiliation that would make modern cancel culture look like a gentle suggestion. Athletes caught bribing opponents, breaking rules, or committing fraud were forced to pay massive fines. That money was then used to commission bronze statues of Zeus, called Zanes, which were erected along the entrance path to the Olympic Stadium at Olympia. On the base of each statue, the cheater's name, their hometown, and a detailed description of their crime were carved into the stone for all future visitors to read. Every athlete walking into the stadium for centuries afterward had to pass these statues, a permanent, inescapable hall of shame. It was the ancient equivalent of having your mugshot plastered on a billboard outside the Super Bowl, except the billboard was made of bronze and lasted 1,000 years. With your name, your crime, and zero chance of anyone ever forgetting what you did. 26. Modern boxing has 12 3-minute rounds, mandatory breaks, weight classes, and a team of medical professionals hovering at ringside. Ancient Greek boxing had absolutely none of that, and it was proud of it. Two fighters wrapped their hands in leather strips called hymantes, stepped into the open, and fought until one of them was knocked unconscious or raised a single finger to signal surrender. That was it. No rounds, no rest periods, no time limit, no weight divisions. A small man could be matched against someone twice his size, and the fight would continue until a body hit the ground or a finger went up. Matches could last minutes or hours. There was nothing separating a boxing match from a bare-knuckle endurance test, except a thin strip of leather on your fists and a profound disregard for your own facial structure. And the Greeks watched this, nodded approvingly, and called it civilized entertainment. The health insurance industry would not be invented for another 2,000 years, and honestly, this is probably why. 27. Milo of Croton was a 6-time Olympic wrestling champion and one of the most legendary strongmen in all of ancient history. According to the famous story, Milo began his strength training as a young man by lifting a newborn calf onto his shoulders and carrying it every single day. As the calf grew larger and heavier, so did Milo's strength, until he was eventually carrying a fully grown bull on his back. He reportedly carried the adult bull across the entire length of the Olympic Stadium, and then, because apparently that was not enough to prove his point, he ate the entire animal in a single day. Whether or not every detail is true, Milo's training method became one of the earliest recorded examples of progressive overload, a principle that every modern strength coach still teaches today. Nobody ever asks how the bull felt about any of this. The man basically invented gym science by befriending a cow and then eating it, and somehow we are supposed to call that inspiring. 28. Ancient Greek long jumpers did not just rely on their legs. They carried heavy stone or metal weights, called halters, in each hand, typically weighing between 2 and 9 pounds each. The technique involved swinging these weights forward during the jump to generate extra momentum, and then releasing or swinging them backward just before landing to propel the body further. Think of it like a human pendulum system, where the weights acted as momentum amplifiers that could add serious distance to your jump. Athletes practiced this obsessively to perfect the timing, because getting it wrong meant the weights would throw off your balance and send you face first into the sandpit, which is a very embarrassing way to lose an Olympic event. This is why ancient long jump distances were measured differently, and why some recorded distances seem impossibly long by modern standards. The Greeks essentially turned the long jump into a physics experiment, handed athletes 2 rocks, and gave out olive wreaths to whoever solved the equation best. 29. Winning at the ancient Olympic Games did not come with a gold medal, a cash prize, or a lucrative shoe deal. The official award was a simple wreath made from the sacred olive tree near the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. That was your trophy, a circle of leaves that would dry out and crumble within weeks. But the real prize came when you went home. Olympic victors were treated as living legends by their home cities. Many received a privilege called psittasis, which was essentially free meals at the public dining hall for the rest of their lives, paid for by the city. Some cities also gave their champions cash bonuses, tax exemptions, front row seats at theaters, and even had the city walls torn down to welcome them back, because a city that produces an Olympic champion supposedly does not need walls. The olive wreath may have looked humble, but what it unlocked was basically an ancient lifetime VIP pass to everything. Modern athletes get Gatorade commercials. Ancient athletes got their entire city treating them like a god who eats for free. 30. The pancration was ancient Greece's most savage combat sport. A no-holds-barred mix of boxing and wrestling where fighters could punch, kick, choke, joint lock, throw, and stomp their opponents into submission. And this terrifying spectacle had only 2 rules in its entire rulebook: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else was completely fair game. You could break fingers, dislocate shoulders, strangle your opponent unconscious, and kick them while they were down, all completely legal and all happening in front of a roaring crowd who considered this a good afternoon out. Matches ended by knockout, submission, or, on more than one occasion, death. The fact that the only line the ancient Greeks drew was, "Okay, but do not bite him and do not poke his eyes out," tells you everything you need to know about where their standards of acceptable violence sat. Spoiler: somewhere underground. The pancration is basically proof that the ancient Greeks invented mixed martial arts, and then forgot to invent the safety regulations. 31. In ancient Greek chariot racing, the Olympic victory wreath was not awarded to the person who actually drove the chariot and risked their life. It went to the owner of the horses. The driver was essentially treated as hired help, a skilled but ultimately replaceable part of the equation. The owner got all the glory, all the fame, and the sacred olive wreath, even if they never touched the reins or went near a horse. This created a legendary loophole. Around 396 BC, a Spartan princess named Cyniska entered her horses in the Olympic 4-horse chariot race and won. Then she did it again 4 years later. She became the first woman in history to win at the Olympic Games, despite the fact that women were not even allowed to attend the Olympics as spectators, under penalty of being thrown off a cliff. She conquered the most prestigious athletic competition in the ancient world without ever setting foot inside the stadium. That is not just a power move. That is the power move. 32. The Nemian Games were one of the 4 great pan-Hellenic athletic festivals of ancient Greece, right alongside the Olympics, the Pythian Games, and the Isthmian Games. Athletes trained for years, endured brutal qualifying competitions, and traveled great distances to compete against the finest athletes in the Greek world. The physical toll was immense. Broken bones, torn muscles, and permanent injuries were the cost of admission. And the ultimate prize for winning this grueling gauntlet of ancient athletic excellence was a wreath woven from fresh wild celery. That is it. Celery. Not gold, not silver, not even olive leaves like the Olympics. Just a leafy green vegetable twisted into a circle and placed on your head while everyone clapped. You bled, you trained, you destroyed your body, and your reward was something a modern person would put in a smoothie without thinking twice. Ancient Greece really had a gift for keeping athletes humble, and the Nemian Games were the masterclass. 33. Diagoras of Rhodes was one of the most celebrated Olympic champions in ancient Greece, a legendary boxer who won at Olympia and became a living symbol of athletic greatness. But the most famous moment of his life happened long after his fighting days were over. At the 83rd Olympiad in 448 BC, both of his sons, Damagetos and Akausilaus, won Olympic victories on the same day. Overcome with pride, they lifted their aging father onto their shoulders and carried him through the stadium. The massive crowd erupted, and spectators reportedly shouted, "Die now, Diagoras, for there is nothing left for you to achieve." And right there, on the shoulders of his champion sons, surrounded by the roar of thousands, Diagoras closed his eyes and died. Whether it was his heart giving out from sheer joy or simply the universe deciding this was the perfect dramatic ending, it remains one of the most extraordinary and strangely beautiful moments in all of Olympic history. That was ancient sports. No helmets, no lawyers, no liability waivers, and honestly, no common sense. Now here is what I need from you. Go to the comments right now and tell me. Which modern professional athlete would survive the longest in the ancient pancration, where the only two rules were no biting and no eye gouging, and everything else, including breaking bones, was completely legal? Name the athlete and explain why. If this video made you rethink how soft modern sports really are, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next.